Hey everyone. So I wanted to kick off with episode 2. So in the last video, we touched on basically an overview of what this project is, what it does, what our plans are. So in episode 2, we're going to be focused on the provisioning. So if you think about the CNCF landscape, we're going to be looking at that bottom layer, and in particular that left-hand corner. There's 2 projects in there that cover that incubating and graduated project today at the time of recording. So we're going to be focused on automation and configuration. The 2 in there, we're going to cover a little bit more detail about that today. Okay, so what are we going to talk on? We're going to talk about the category and the section. We're going to talk about the projects, the 2 projects, and then we're going to finish up with 2 demos. I'd rather get to the demos quicker than going through the theory, but I think it's important to set the scene, set that foundation of what it is that we're talking about and why here. So what does provisioning mean? If you think about what that whole bottom layer of the CNCF landscape is, it's tools that are used to create and harden the foundation on which cloud native apps are built. So pretty simple stuff. This is where we're starting. This is why it's at the bottom. This is why it's at that foundational level, because it's what's used to help us create what we're trying to achieve. In particular, this is then built up into sections. Again, in the first video, we touched on a lot of this, and what we're covering today is that automation and configuration. So codifying the environment setup, it becomes reproducible with the click of a button. Now, actually, when I first looked at that as a description, you're thinking about tools like infrastructure as code, maybe Terraform, even Crossplane to a degree, but we'll get to that later on. It probably wasn't what I was thinking it was going to be when we start looking at the 2 projects that land in there. Now, there are more projects in there if you take off the filters that I'm only looking at. I'm only looking at incubating and graduated projects in here. So the first one is Cloud Custodian. And I was a little bit shocked when I started looking into Cloud Custodian. So this is a project mostly maintained by a company called Stacklet. And you can think about this. In fact, let me just read out what their blurb is. So Cloud Custodian enables you to manage your cloud resources by filtering, tagging, and then applying actions to them. The YAML DSL allows definition of rules to enable well-managed cloud infrastructure that's both secure and cost optimized. Now, the naivety of myself was I was thinking that actually the CNCF landscape was going to be very much Kubernetes focused, containerization. It wasn't so much going to be filtering into that cloud world around cloud virtual machines, cloud PaaS-based workloads, etc. So when we get into the demo, you'll see what I mean, because I actually don't touch anything to do with Kubernetes at that point, or containerization, to be fair. Okay, so Cloud Custodian, you can go on the website. It's a great website. Very in-depth, quite easy to read, great documentation. But think about this as real-time compliance, things like cost management, shift left, run anywhere, open source, obviously, and a simple desired state language to achieve all of this. Before we get into the demo, before I go show you a bit of Cloud Custodian, I wanted to touch on the use case that I used in there, and that was around AWS EC2 tagging. I won't spoil the demo, so you'll get into that. But the premise of it is that we want to enforce, or we want to put some sort of governance around our potentially huge cloud estate, multi-cloud estate, and make sure that we had, whether it be tags that are then used in other forms of our operations team, such as backup, and that's what I actually use. But also think about other areas and in-depth areas. They run through really loads of scenarios. I'll show you that in the demo as well. But there's a lot of use cases here, and I think this is probably one of the most undervalued projects that at least I'd never come across it. So I think that's worth alone, like a little look into what they do. By the way, none of these videos are sponsored by anyone. This is me trying to give back to the community, but equally learn about some of these projects that we have within the ecosystem. So as we kickstart our first demo, these are the 2 projects that I want to cover here in regards to Cloud Custodian as well as KubeEdge. So we're going to kick things off with Cloud Custodian, and from a project perspective, it's a rule engine for cloud security, cost optimization, and governance. And I'm going to run through a little demo that gets our hands on with the actual project itself, mostly around governance, but you can actually see how this works with everything else as well. Interestingly enough, it works across clouds as well. It's not just Kubernetes, so I think that's quite interesting as well. Some great getting started guides, like it's a Python, it runs on Python, so I've already got Python installed on my machine. As you can see here, I'm running 3.10.6 at the time of recording, and I'm running on Windows subsystem for Linux. So I need to look at the Linux commands, and you'll notice here that, okay, I'm going to run through the install scenario. The C7N executable that we're going to use already includes AWS. You saw as well on the Getting Started part guide. If you're running Azure or Google or even Kubernetes, then you'll need some additional binaries. You see here as well that I was missing some Python stuff, so I jumped back in. That won't work, so spoiler alert. So I dive back in. At the top of this, you see that I hovered over, I'm missing a package or missing something from my Python installation. So I dive back up to the top and I get that sorted. Here we go. So apt install Python 3. Then I realized that you can't run that without sudo. So I hit sudo in front and supply my credentials to get that installed. Okay, so really simple CLI-based installation, quite simple. Cross operating systems, works with Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. So now let's go and I'm going to reinstall over the top of what I've already done. So you're going to see a lot of what we've already seen. One thing to note, because we're talking to AWS, Boto 3 is used there as part of that. So running Custodian-H gives us all of the commands that we have access to through that. So I'm going to touch on some of these, and some of them will make sense as to what we're showing. Okay, so one thing I also had to make sure is that I have my AWS access key and secret, or AWS configure has been done on this. So I have the AWS CLI also on my on my WSL. And what I've done in AWS is I've just created two simple EC2 instances. One's called Web Server 01, and I've created a tag called Backup Policy. For those that know me, I'm in the backup world, so this makes sense to me. But then I have a database server, probably the most important one out of the two, is that one doesn't have a backup policy. So we'll get to that shortly. Okay, so first up is I want to use Cloud Custodian to actually interrogate my AWS account. I want to see all of my EC2 instances that are running in a particular namespace. And we can do that using a couple of commands here. So we could use the custodian run, and that's going to report back a count. And we can use report, which is going to give us a bit more detail about that. But before we do that, we've got custodian schema, AWS, and you could obviously put Azure in there as well, and that's going to give you report or the options that we have available. It'd help if I could spell schema right, and then you can drill down into the options or the filters that we have within each resource within AWS. Obviously, the documentation has a huge amount that can help you on that, and this is just a very short and quick demo. Okay, so now I want to run this. I want to export that out. I want to use it in US East 1, and I want to see all my instances. You can see there, count 2. Not very spectacular from a demo perspective, but you can see how this would hopefully work in a larger environment. And then if we run report, it gives us a little bit more detail. One, the names, but equally the AMIs, the dates, the VPCs, the IP addresses, etc. that we see within there. Okay, that's great. Might be a reporting tool that you want to use. Now, why wouldn't I just use AWS describe EC2 describe instances? Well, obviously it's a long and bulky output, and really, yeah, I could. But that's not really the point of Cloud Custodian. Cloud Custodian is, okay, now we're going back to those tags. Let me understand, okay, we know that web server has the gold, but database doesn't. Obviously, we saw that in the management console of AWS, but think of this at scale. Think of this where you're not actually the owner, you're not deploying this, you're in the SRE team, you're responsible for the data. You lose anything, bad times. So now we're going to create another policy called gold backup instances, which is going to just give us the information about EC2 instances that are tagged with that backup policy gold. We're going to run that. You can see here that we have one with the run, so very short amount of data when you use the run command with Custodian, but it might just be enough that triggers something. Sort out my pasting. And now if we report that now, you'll see, okay, so we know that web server 01, that we know already because we've been into the console, so we know this. Okay, so if we dive back into our, yeah, okay, confirmed. Yes, we know that. We saw that before. Find the terminal. Okay, so now we want to get a bit smarter about how we deal with this. And Cloud Custodian can actually enforce or perform an action that allows us to tag any untagged. So what this has done, I've created a policy called no backup instances. It's going to report them back, and it's going to say if it's absent, then I want you to tag it with that gold feature. And we can put some more filters on that as well, like if it's an EC2 instances that is using a particular name or what that needs to be. So obviously there I've just run that. It's then gone, okay, now we have a count of 2. So it's reported back that 2 resources are updated. If we go into database now and tags, spoiler alert, okay, there you go. Quite powerful as well. Like if you think about backup software that is based on using those tags, we're now in the policy, we're being protected along with all of the other gold machines that we have within our environment. Pretty powerful stuff. Think about how else you could leverage that. Think about how else you could potentially spin up, spin down machines if they're not being used. Look at resource, look at utilization, etc. Okay, so I've run a report though. Well, actually, it's still just saying web server 01. Okay, so there's a cache. If you look at this, there's about a 15-minute wait or 15-minute before you actually go and poll back. So we can cheat. We can use this cache period 0, and that's now going to run against that, and we're going to see a count of 2. If we then go back and run that report again, you'll see that we have both of those listed. They're both tagged gold that we see in the management console. Generally speaking, if it wasn't a demo, obviously we could just wait. The backup software would pick it up dynamically. But yeah, there's a lot more information in all of the and example policies as well. FinOps is massive right now as well. So off hours, making sure that we're not running workloads that don't need to be running. Let's be a little bit more prudent on how we control that. So there's a lot of examples in there that you can run against your machines in there. So with that, let's go back to the second demo. Okay, so after that demo, we're now going to look at our second project, which is KubeEdge. So completely different. KubeEdge is obviously focused on edge computing and being able to run our workloads at the edge. There's a lot of examples around things like Raspberry Pi and all of that good stuff, but completely different to what we just looked at. So KubeEdge.io, and to be honest, I found this a very difficult demo to put together. I feel like if I had more time, I would really want to help, and if I had a bit more likeness, or I'm not drawn towards edge computing too much because it's not really in my wheelhouse. So, but if we look at KubeEdge, open source system for extended native containerized application orchestration capabilities to host at edge. It is built upon Kubernetes and provides fundamental infrastructure support for network application deployment and metadata synchronization. So very, very different in contrast to what we mentioned. And I think if we go back to that original description, both of the projects that we're showing don't really add up to that automation provisioning description that I mentioned. The quick fire bullet points of what KubeEdge is. So Kubernetes native API at edge. You'll see that in the demo. Is we're doing everything through kubectl. Seamless cloud edge coordination. You'll see that again. Edge autonomy, low resource ready, simplified device communication, heterogeneous, doesn't matter where it runs, very agnostic to that. Again, before we get into the demo, all of the steps that I take will be listed, and yeah, with that, let's get into the demo. Okay, so for our second demo, we're going to be looking at KubeEdge. So this is a CNCF project that is about extending native containerized applications to hosts at our edge. So you can see here, KubeEdge.io gives us a description, basically what we went through in very brief detail at the very beginning of the video, and some comprehensive documentations around getting started. I found that when I looked up this project, there wasn't much out there. I think that's a shame, because I feel like this extends that. It really brings that edge story, but completely different to what we just looked at with Cloud Custodian. So within KubeEdge, we have Kedem, or it's basically the KubeEdge admin tool, a CLI that allows us to deploy that. So I've already gone ahead and I've done that. Over on the left-hand side, you're going to see that we have KubeEdge Cloud, and over on the right, we have KubeEdge Edge. So no guessing to what that's going to be focused on. So I'm going to jump into our root credentials. I'm following along the documentation, but equally the one use case that I did find. So you can see here on both of these VMs, these are just virtual machines on my local network. They have Docker installed. You can see that I'm also using Kind, so Kubernetes in Docker, as my Kubernetes instance. And you can see here that it's a single node. It's a Docker container, Kubernetes in Docker. It's been up for 5 minutes. It's using an old version, but nonetheless, it gives you what we need. Obviously, it has kubectl as well. And over on the edge, we have Docker equally installed, and that will become more clear later on. Now, on both systems, I've already gone ahead and I've run through the curl commands, and I've got the Kedem CLI tool already up and running. Okay, so let's now begin that journey of deploying. So what we're going to use is an init command. We're going to advertise the address of this cloud machine, which is 192.168.169.188, and we're going to say what version of KubeEdge we want to use, and then where is our kube config for that matter as well. So what this is going to do is it's going to go and download all the information that it needs, and you can see here KubeEdge Cloud Core is running. Pretty simple stuff. Granted, I had run this before, so I didn't have to wait for the images to come down, but yeah, pretty simple stuff. And then you can see here that I've just used Kedem again to get this token, and that's important for that join-in. For those of you that have ever used KubeADM, you know the power of tokens, for example, to be able to get things registered. Okay, so with that, our cloud core or our cloud VM is good, and then we're going to go and run this join command over on the edge machine. So you can see there that we've kicked things off with that join, and we've noted that port 10,000, and then you've got to set this check edge core environment to false, just for demo purposes. I'm sure there's more documentation on this, and it goes away and it pulls down the images within Docker to host what it needs for that edge purpose, for that communication there. Now, I found that there was a few things, or a few, let's say, features with this, and I banged my head against my desk quite a bit today, just trying to figure things out. And even though I watched endless the one YouTube demo that I did find, so you see here that this system this service never ever starts until you make these changes that I'm about to show you, and I'll have them documented as well in the repo, so you'll get to see them if you wanted to play along with it. So we can also go and look at our journal CTL and get a run of play, basically an event log of what is happening. You can see that there's edge core service is failing. Now, a lot of reading, a lot of searching, not finding much. I went through, and it says about from Docker C group. So out of the box, it wants to use C group FS versus systemd. So I want to make that change. So I jumped into a configuration, the edge core configuration file, which you can find at KubeEdge config edgecore.yaml. You can see here, and then you scroll all the way down and you find that C group driver, which is there, and then you type in systemd. And I also make another change here for the host name. So if you don't change this, it doesn't matter, it still works, but I just wanted it to come up with a KubeEdge node, and we'll see that later when it joins our Kubernetes cluster. So bearing in mind, obviously this isn't very edgy in terms of, this is just 2 VMs on the local network. So things will start coming up now. Obviously this gets it into its desired state. There's no restarting or anything that we have to do. Maybe that does speed things up. But if we head on over to our cloud system and we run kubectl get nodes, we're now going to see that new edge, that KubeEdge node that we just added 13 seconds ago with the role of agent and edge is in a status of not ready. Now we can see that the edge core service on the right hand side is running. All good stuff. Let's wait for the power of time to unlock this. So let's hit a watch command and just see that trickle in, and hopefully that goes to a ready status. And then once that gets to that ready status, and as you can see, sorry, on the right hand side, you'll see that we have that initial Docker entry point for that joining of the edge node to our cluster. And when that flips over to ready, over on the left hand side, we're going to do a Docker PS again. There we go, and we're ready. So let's do that again, and you'll start to see, okay, so these are other kube systems that are just defining what that looks like as a edge node within our cluster. Now, what if we wanted to actually run an application? Now, I've put together a very simple Nginx container. It seems to be the demo container that I'm going to use quite a bit. You can see here, okay, so I've added that, I've created that in the default namespace, completely against best practice. I would always give it a normally into its own namespace. Okay, good stuff. You can see that Nginx 1 of 1 running on our node, KubeEdge node. Okay, so what can you expect to see over here on the right hand side? Bearing in mind this, we don't have Kubernetes installed. We do not have kubectl. We are just leveraging the Docker engine over here. So if we run, you can see already that Nginx is there, but if I do a grep, you can see Nginx -G. So with that, okay, so thanks for watching those 2 demos. As you know, the premise of this project of mine, this UpTheStack, is to start looking into those 55 projects, CNCF Landscape projects, graduated, incubated, that we have across the CNCF Landscape. One, firstly, selfishly, is I want to learn more about them. I want to know if there's any hidden gems out there that we want to be able to use in my day-to-day as a DevRel, as a field CTO within my company. The second thing is I'm obviously doing that the whole learning in public, very similar to 90 Days of DevOps. Is okay, like if I'm just going to be taking notes, then I want to share this with you as well. Like give you the perspective from that, because you may not have time to do it and you might consume through this. So again, thanks for watching. That's episode 2. And yeah, come back and watch what we've got in store for episode 3. Laters.